Hi, this is part four, or the second part of the female reproductive system. I just want to point out this video that I'm going to put on your module. You should watch this. This is a procedure that's nicknamed ICSI, or just called ICSI, but it stands for this intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And this is what, if a woman or a couple can't get pregnant, they can actually inject a sperm directly into the egg. This is really cool because you can see the corona radiata, you can see the secondary oocyte, you can see a glimmer of the zona pellucida. You can actually also see that this polar body, this secondary polar body that's still kind of trapped within the corona radiata of the ovum. So anyways, really cool video. Watch it and then you can continue on with your lecture. Let's take a look at the next part here. So we're going to start with the uterine tube or fallopian tube. So the uterine tube is going to be the structure that catches the ovulated ovum, and it's going to extend from the uterus all the way to the ovaries, and there's different parts to them. So let's take a look at external anatomy. The infundibulum is the distal portion of our uterine tube. The infundibulum contains fimbria, so the fimbria are part of this. And the fimbria are finger-like projections that will actually coax. They have movement that help create a suction to catch the ovulated ovum and route it into the infundibulum. After the infundibulum, there's the ampulla. The ampulla is a wider portion of this structure. It will narrow into an isthmus, and then the uterine part, letter D on your outline, is actually right here. So the uterine part is the portion that attaches to the uterus. Internally, let's take a look at the internal structure. So this is part of your histology unit as well. So you're going to recognize the uterine tube. So it's going to be a band of smooth muscle. So notice that you have a lot of light pink. That's going to indicate smooth muscle. The lumen is going to be very different looking. This looks like maybe a collapsed lumen in general, but other images of this will look, it's like a maze. It's very convoluted, and there's a lot of mucous membrane that kind of points in and forms like a lot of finger-like interdigitations of this lumen. So it's going to be very, very unique looking. So the lining of the uterine tube is going to have cells with cilia. Not entirely, not every single cell has cilia, but there are ciliated columnar cells that create a current to move the ovum into the uterus. So there are two components that move the ovum into the uterus. So remember, that little cell that's released here has to move all the way down this structure into the uterus. So number one is the cilia. The cilia is going to sweep the ovum across the surface and move it, propel it towards the uterus. And the second thing is the smooth muscle will contract with peristaltic contractions and move that egg also towards the uterus. Now, what happens? There is a disorder here called an ectopic pregnancy. What happens if you have implantation by accident of that fertilized egg into the wall of the fallopian tube or the uterine tube, right? It can start to develop. So early on, the embryo can start to develop, but this is never going to reach its full development. The uterine tube is not designed to have a baby. That's what the uterus is for. So this is always going to have to come out. There's drugs or there's surgical methods that you can remove this ectopic pregnancy, but this is never going to survive, and it's also impossible to transport this ectopic pregnancy into the uterus. So this is always a dangerous situation for the woman. All right, let's take a look at the next picture here. So we can see the full reproductive tract here. We're going to talk about the uterus. So the uterus itself has a fundus, just like the stomach, right? So this, if I drew a straight line across the surface of the uterus, this upper portion that sticks up is called the fundus. The body is the main portion of our uterus, and then we have the cervix. The cervix is this distal end where it narrows. Actually, with the narrow portion is called the isthmus. isthmus of the uterus. And then the cervix is what goes into the vagina. It faces the vagina and it goes into it. So it protrudes into the vagina. The cervix is what is the organ that is checked in Pap smears, or the region of the uterus that's checked in a Pap smear. I have a picture. Here it is. This is the normal cervix. So when the OBGYN looks into their speculum, you can see the wall of the vagina. So you can see the vagina here, there's folds of that wall. Those are actually called rugae, the same word that we have in the stomach, and it's the same function. So it's going to have basically extra tissue so that the vagina can stretch for both intercourse and also for childbirth. The cervix is this structure here. You can see there's a central opening. This is called the os, O-S. And they're taking a look at the tissue here, right? So if there's, you would scrape a little bit of the mucous membrane from the cervix, put it on a microscope slide and check it for any abnormalities. So this is a perfectly healthy cervix. There could be cervical cancer, of course, where you have blemishes in regions of abnormality that they would actually take a look at. So that's your cervix. Let's go back to that picture and look at what holds the uterus in place. So we have the broad ligament. Okay, so the broad ligament, again, is the ligament that goes all the way across and over, and the uterus is kind of inside of the sleeping bag of the broad ligament. So you can see the ligament has two parts to it, so that stabilizes the uterus. There's something called the uterosacral ligament, and as the name tells you, it runs from the uterus to the sacrum. So this is this is posterior view, but it doesn't actually show the uterosacral ligament. And if I pause, I'm going to pause it, show you the picture. In this initial image, you can actually see the uterosacral ligament here, right? So this is going to lead towards the sacrum and anchor the uterus to the sacrum. But in that earlier image, that isn't present. So, but you do find it in this diagram. And then the last round ligament, the round ligament is here, okay? It's going to run from the uterus towards the anterior pelvic cavity. So the broad ligament anchors side to side, laterally. The uterosacral ligament runs posteriorly, and the round ligament runs anteriorly. So we're stabilizing the uterus within the pelvic cavity with these structures. If those ligaments become relaxed over time, there is a condition called a prolapsed uterus. So let me show you. This is the normal position of the uterus. This is a uterus that has prolapsed into the vagina. So this, everything's connected, right? The vagina is connected. It runs around the uterus. The uterus is bound and projects into the vagina. So if the uterus, the broad ligament, uterosacral ligament, round ligament become relaxed and unable to hold the uterus up, it could slip into the vagina. So this is prolapse, and there's degrees of prolapse, but this is just a very, it bulges into the vagina. This is a pretty profound picture of that. All right, so that's the importance of our ligaments holding the uterus in place. Let's take a look at the internal anatomy. So back to this picture, we see the wall of the uterus. The endometrium is the inner lining, represented in white. The myometrium, so the uterus really is just a very thick, smooth, muscular organ, and the muscles here are, they contract during menstruation. So when you feel menstrual cramps, then that is the contraction of the uterus trying to kind of push out that lining of your endometrium during menstruation. If you have not had children yet, labor feels just like menstrual cramps, except, I don't know, a billion times more intense. So, so that's that same sensation. You'll feel a very familiar sensation when during child labor. And then this outer portion is called the perimetrium. So perimetrium is the outer portion, myometrium is the muscle portion, and endometrium is the inner lining. Let's take a look at the endometrium. The endometrium is this area here. So there's blood vessels that come in here. This is why when you menstruate, it's very bloody, because the tissue is very rich in blood. I want to look at this picture here. So if you look at the endometrium, we have simple columnar cells. We have two layers. There is a functional layer, which the arrow points here, so it's the upper portion of the endometrium, and then we have the basilar layer, which is the bottom portion. The glandular part is found in the functional layer. So this functional layer is the layer that changes in thickness during the woman's cycle. The basilar layer does not change at all. It's just that stable minimum amount of endometrium that's always present. And the functional layer gets thicker and thicker in response to progesterone. And then it's shed in menstruation. So it's the functional layer that you're losing during your period. All right, so I have an image of the this picture here. So I went over this already in the last segment. So let's move on to the vagina. So the vagina is a fibromuscular tube that leads towards the cervix, which is part of our uterus. And there's a couple structures here. So I already said that there's rugae, right? These transverse folds in the vagina so they can stretch. The fornix, all right, this word fornix is the area around the cervix, right? So it's kind of like a groove that fits around the cervix called the fornix. And then the hymen, so here's that location of a hymen that's torn. So this is highly variable in different women. There's a membrane that can go across the opening to the vagina, and which is called the hymen. And the hymen can be barely there, very thin, not noticed at all when the woman uses a tampon or has intercourse for the first time. You know, there's very little sensation to rupturing a hymen because it's barely there. And then other women will have a very thick, durable hymen that is, causes a lot of pain during intercourse the first time, and because it breaks the hymen and it bleeds a lot. So it's just a very variable structure, but there's a membrane that can partially cover or completely cover the opening to the vagina. All right. So I think that's it for this picture. Looking at the external genitalia. So let me just turn the page here. So external genitalia is also known as your vulva. And the vulva is going to have two labia. So the word labium is singular. Labium majus is the larger fold of skin that has pubic hair on it. And then labium minus is the smaller fold of skin that is internal, and the space between the two labium minus will be called the vestibule. So let's take a look at this the other way. So moving through your notes, the Mons Pubis. The Mons Pubis is a pad of fat that is over the pubic symphysis, and this is always present in women. I have labia majora and labia minora. So you can call them, labium is singular, labia is plural. You can use minora and majora, or you can use the other terms here, majus and minus. It's up to you. I tend to say minora and majora. All right, so here's our Mons Pubis, the labia. So the labium majora, right? So this is going to be the larger fold of skin here with the pubic hair on it. Then we can see this smaller fold of skin here where we have the labia minora. The vestibule is the space between the labia minora. Then there's the opening to the vagina. So we have the vaginal opening. Then we have the urethral opening. And then we have the erectile tissue that is homologous to the penis. So this, the clitoris is homologous to the penis because it's both sexually sensitive as well as contains erectile tissue. So this prepuce, right, just like the prepuce of the penis on the glands, what we call the foreskin, this is also present on the clitoris. The glans clitoris is going to be the distal end of the clitoris. So what's interesting about the homology of the two sexes is that in development, right, before the fetus actually begins to show sexual differences in morphology, you have sort of the same tissues in the fetus. So if the fetus is going to become a male, then that spongy tissue will become the penis. If the fetus is becoming a female, the spongy tissue is the clitoris. And then the scrotum of the male is actually what becomes the labia of the female. So actually, let's also look at this picture. So this is kind of an interesting picture of that erectile tissue for a female and a male. Turns out they're very, very similar. So picture A here is the clitoris. The clitoris is the only part that's external would be the glands, right? The glands and the prepuce. So this is the only part that you see from the outside, but all this other stuff, this other tissue is going to be internal, and it's going to follow the labia. For the male, most of this is outside, external. So this is visible, and then where you see it split, this is going to be internal. Okay, so it's very, very similar, and this was published in 2014. Just thought I'd show you, it's very interesting. Let's take a look at the glands here. So you can see there's something called the vestibular bulb or the vestibular gland, and you have the number 6 in your outline, the internal glands, greater vestibular gland. This is homologous to the bulbourethral gland in males. It's slightly posterior and to the left and right of the opening to the vagina, so you can see how it is here. I'm sorry, I pulled it out vestibular bulb here. It's the greater vestibular gland here, and it secretes mucus to lubricate the vagina, okay, for intercourse. Another way of looking at this, let me see if I have the, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you this. So this is the position of the erectile tissue for the clitoris in the female and the position of the erectile tissue of the penis of the male. Here we go. So here's our greater vestibular gland. All right, so we can see the position here. It's at the entrance to the vagina, posterior to it. But there's some other glands here. There's letter A in your outline, the paraurethral glands. So we can see that here, right? The paraurethral glands are around the urethra, and those are going to be homologous to the prostate gland, also known as Skene's glands. Okay, and then we have the clitoris here. So the way that it's shown in this mid-sagittal section is this way. The labia will be the labium majus here, the minus here, and then the Mons Pubis, which is actually not pointed out here, but it's going to be this area, right? So the Mons Pubis will have pubic hair on it. It'll be fat underneath it and anterior to the pubic symphysis. All right, I think that might be it. So looking at this overview, we went through the ovary here. We have the fimbria. We have the uterine tube leading to the uterus. We have the 3 layers of the uterus present. We have the cervix sort of going into the vagina. The fornix are the area around the cervix and the vagina. Be really careful because these two are oftentimes confused. So the bladder is going to be underneath, right, inferior to the uterus, and that's going to be the urethra. The uterus is on top, and then the line coming out, right, that tube is going to be the vagina. Here, this muscle going across is going to be the urogenital sphincter. I'm sorry, urogenital diaphragm, which contains the external urethral sphincter. But the entire muscle, again, is the urogenital diaphragm. And this is skeletal muscle, so you can contract it, or you can control it voluntarily. Let's see, we have the rectum. I think that's about it in this picture. So here's an image of an actual dissection, mid-sagittal dissection. So you can see the relative sizes of these things. So the uterus here, and then look how muscular this structure is versus the bladder. All right, so wrapping up with the mammary glands. Mammary glands are going to make milk to feed the infants, and we have externally, we have an areola and a nipple. So the areola is dark in color, and this is because infants cannot see color very well, but they have very good contrast, so they can see basically the difference between light and dark. Then their eyes will soon develop the more and more ability to discern more colors and more contrast. But that's why if you see like newborn baby toys, a lot of them are black and white, or have like a lot of very graphic, checkerboard or swirls or something, because their eyes are going to look for a dark area, and that's going to basically like a little bullseye. So the babies will know that that's where the milk is coming from because they can tell that light versus dark. The nipple, of course, is where the milk is secreted from. There are lots of sebaceous glands in this area because when a woman is breastfeeding, it's a chafing activity. The skin can get very dried out, so there's extra sebaceous glands to produce sebum, which is that oil, to help to basically lubricate that area. I think lubricate, but act like a natural lotion, right? All right, so the breast tissue is actually superficial to the pectoralis major. So you can see the pectoralis major here. And there are ligaments called suspensory ligaments that help hold the breast tissue to the pectoralis major. Now, internally, we have lobes, 15 to 20 lobes of the breast. And so you can see this entire structure here is a lobe with smaller lobules. So the individual smaller lumps here are each a lobule. And these are going to be the milk producing areas. The lobes, the mammary glands produce the milk. They're going to secrete the milk into a duct. All right, and the very end of the duct is called the lactiferous duct. That lactiferous duct leads to a sinus, and then that sinus will fill with milk as it leaves through the nipple. A lot of adipose here between the lobes, and that's about it. So lactation is controlled with two hormones, or I guess I should say breastfeeding is controlled with two hormones. The process of lactation is the process of making milk. So lactation is under the hormone prolactin, another really great name for a hormone because it's prolactin, that helps to produce the milk. But ejection of the milk, having the milk come out through the nipple, depends on another hormone, oxytocin. So oxytocin contracts the smooth muscle that are within these glands that can expel the milk, and also within the sinus to expel the milk. Okay, so two hormones, prolactin to make the milk, and then oxytocin to eject the milk. And I think that wraps it up. This is a nice 0 mammogram of the breast tissue, so you can see the pectoralis major muscle itself, the ribs, of course, then you can see the breast tissue. You can see the finer, darker lines of the suspensory ligaments. All right, so I'll put this up as well in your module. This is for fun. I'll give this as an optional thing you can do. It's just kind of a funny thing that if I have time in class, I'll show it to the class.